Today, we are going to cover 7 different rigging methods for night crawlers and worms. They're going to help you catch more fish no matter where you're fishing or for what species. Now, night crawlers and worms are one of the most versatile live baits out there, and they're readily available across the country. They're pretty easy to keep in bulk, and they're very reasonably priced. So any well-rounded angler should know how to fish these baits in a bunch of different ways, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. So stick around to the end, because I'm also going to give you 5 tips on how to keep live bait a long time and also save some money. So we're going to kind of work our way from the most simple to the more complicated rigging methods, and for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to call everything Nightcrawler since that's what I'm using today. So with that said, let's get into the rigging with rigging method number 1. It doesn't get much simpler than this. This is just a free-lined Nightcrawler, no weight, maybe a swivel if you want to tie a leader on there at the most, but that's just a hook and a worm. And that is one of the best ways to catch fish across the country, anywhere you're fishing shallow or where you want that presentation to drift down through the water column very naturally. Now, a lot of times I'll be fishing this in a river system for trout in shallow water. Let that current take the bait down through and let those trout pick that worm up. It's a very natural presentation. Another place I'll fish this would be like panfish suspended over structure. You know, you don't want that bait to sink too fast or it'll sink past them, so you don't want any weight on there. That's a perfect way to present that Nightcrawler for those panfish as well. And even when the walleyes are super shallow up on the edges of the weeds, you can pitch this to them and let that Nightcrawler drift down through the water column, and it's a great presentation for finicky fish and shallow fish. All right guys, rigging method number 2, and this one is a killer. And it's oftentimes underutilized, but it's just the plain split shot rig. It's basically a free line rig with a split shot pinched above it. But this is a great rig for drifting in rivers. Get it down there in those deeper holes. Walleyes, trout, just about anything that lives in a river will hit this rig. And it lets that Nightcrawler kind of still bounce through the current. It's not going to hold it in place. You want to keep it moving, but sometimes you need that little split shot just to get it down to where the fish are. Now, don't discount this for lakes either. I've caught a lot of nice walleyes on the split shot rig when I want a finessey presentation and I don't want a lot of weight on that bait. Sometimes you just need to fish a deeper spot and you don't want to wait 20 feet of water for that Nightcrawler to sink down free line. Put a little split shot on there, it'll sink a little faster. Great bait for target fishing, cribs, deeper wood cover. You can drag this around shallower weed lines as well. So as far as the hook on this, I'm using a bait holder hook on this. It's a really good way to fish a Nightcrawler around panfish and anywhere you're making long casts. It'll hold that crawler on there a long time. This would be a number 6. That's a good size to start with. So that's your split shot rig. Very versatile. Use it all the time for panfish, walleyes, trout, you name it, and even rough fish. So caught a lot of fish on that rig over the years. All right guys, rigging method number 3, the jig. Now a jig and a half a crawler has put more walleyes in the boat over the years than just about anything else, especially in the summertime. It's a great way to cover lots of water and target fish with this bait, because you can see that jig exactly where it's going. You can drop it right on a fish, especially with live scope that we have now, and you can see where that bait is on that live scope, know exactly where that fish is in relation to it, and it's just a good, efficient, quick way to fish a Nightcrawler. Now on a jig that you're going to be using for a Nightcrawler, you want to have a really good keeper on there so that that crawler doesn't slide back down the hook shank and get caught in the gap. You want a good keeper. This is a Euro tackle jig right here, and it's a tungsten jig. It's got flat sides on it. I'll leave a link in the description for that. It's a great live scope jig because it really glows on that live scope. I'll leave links for everything I'm talking about down below in the description in this video too, just so you can find them easily, and if you purchase through those links, it really helps the channel out, so I appreciate that. All right guys, let's move on to rigging method number 4, the slip bobber rig. This is interchangeable with a fixed bobber rig, really either one. The slip bobber rig is more popular in lakes where you're fishing deeper water, and a fixed float would be more for like drifting this bait in a river or fishing maybe shallow panfish or something like that. It's one of those presentations that almost anybody can fish. It's a great way for kids to fish a crawler, and it just keeps that bait hovering right in the strike zone. Also fishing live scope, you can pitch this out to exact points and let that crawler just drop right on a fish's head. And for a slip bobber rig with a crawler, I really do like to use a jig head most of the time. And this rig really just consists of a jig head, a leader up to a swivel, a little 1/4 or 1/8 ounce weight here just to get that rig down quickly to the fish, your slip float, and then your knot and bead. All right guys, before I move on to method number 5, if you're getting value from this video, please subscribe, hit that like button. That really helps the channel out, as well as making those purchases through the links down in the description. So I appreciate it, guys. All right, number 5, the Lindy rig. You guys have all heard of the Lindy rig, right? That was the OG rigging method. Well, basically all this is a swivel and some sort of weight, sliding weight, so when a walleye picks that crawler up, that weight slides down the line and they don't feel that weight on there. It allows you to fish this fairly deep on the bottom or near the bottom, and while you're drifting around, and it'll hold that bait down towards the bottom. We've got a really long leader on here, about a 6-foot leader. A lot of guys use too short of leaders on rigs, and it doesn't allow for what really triggers fish on this rig, which is for that bait to be kind of just floating around and drifting. So that's really what makes it such a good finesse presentation. So make sure you're using a long enough leader. You can use any kind of octopus hook or bait holder like I showed you earlier, or you can use a floating jig head like I have here, and that's going to keep it up off the bottom more and kind of hold it up if those fish are suspended a little bit, keep it from dragging in the mud. And that's a great little trick. Now you'll notice too that most of these night crawlers I've been hooking through the head of the crawler. That's typically the presentation you're going to want for almost any night crawler method. It's the toughest part of the crawler, and it lets the crawler present naturally with that kind of flowy look behind it. You don't usually want to gob that crawler up on the hook unless you're fishing for like a bottom feeding fish like catfish or a sturgeon, where they just want a big meal of big gob of crawlers. For most fish, this is the presentation you want, is just kind of double, triple hooked through the head, letting that tail section dangle and attract the fish. All right, number 6, guys, and this is one of my absolute favorite ways to fish a crawler, and that is the drop shot. Drop shot rigs have been around for a while now in the bass fishing world especially. These were designed to fish finesse worms and keep them at a consistent level above the bottom, but boy do they work with live bait as well, and especially a night crawler. Great walleye presentation, great panfish presentation. It fishes super fast and super efficiently, and you know that bait is always whatever distance you have your hook from that weight all the time. And if the fish are hanging 2 feet off the bottom, you know your bait is 2 feet off the bottom, whether you're fishing in 30 feet of water or 5 feet of water. So with this rig, I really like the VMC spin shot for a crawler. These crawlers aren't perfectly straight, so they tend to spin, and that little swivel will help that hook kind of spin around the line without twisting the line up. And then just one of these little clip-on 1/4 ounce drop shot weights and you're in business. Super effective way to catch fish in deeper water, and one of my favorites. Now you can also pinch this crawler off and do a half a crawler if you're getting short strikes, and that works just as well most of the time. So again, I'll leave links in the description for the rig here, but that's one of my favorite, especially midsummer to fall rigging methods for a crawler. Right there is the drop shot. All right guys, finally rigging method number 7, and this is the best way to troll any kind of night crawler or worm, and that is with some sort of either a sliding weight or some sort of bottom bouncer like I have here, and a spinner rig. This is a deadly way to catch all kinds of fish, but especially walleyes, especially when you don't have a lot of weeds and you've got hard bottom or mud bottom, and you can troll that thing around on flats, and that spinner just spins ahead of that crawler, and it's the best of both worlds. You've got flash and you've got that live bait. This spinner rig in particular has a slow death hook on it, so the hook also spins. You can do any combination of spinner and slow death. You can do a slow death hook just by itself and just have that crawler spinning behind, or you can use a 3-hook spinner or a 2-hook spinner that kind of puts some hooks behind towards the back of that crawler to keep fish from picking it off. Now this bottom bouncer here is actually Fish Daddy Outdoors lighted bottom bouncer, it's really cool. It's got a little LED stick in here and it'll light up, so fishing at night, it kind of gives the fish something to key on and kind of makes that bait glow behind it. And this is just a Venom Outdoors spinner rig. And you're just going to pull this along and let that weight kind of drag along the bottom, 1.5, 1.2, fairly slow, just enough to keep that spinner spinning. And it's a super, super deadly way to cover water. You can put a bunch of rods out there and really, really cover some water for those flats fish that are all spread out. All right, guys, so there you have it. 7 techniques for rigging night crawlers that are going to catch you more fish. Now let's get into 5 tips to help you save money and keep your bait a little bit longer. Tip number 1, if you use a lot of night crawlers, buy your night crawlers in bulk. You can get night crawlers from Amazon or a bunch of other online retailers. I'm going to leave a link below for some night crawlers that you can pick up super cheap. You can buy them in bulk. If you have a fridge, you can keep them in the fridge like the whole summer. So you can order all the night crawlers you're going to need ahead of time and save tons of money that way. Tip number 2, if you can buy these smaller night crawlers, they're almost the same price as a pack of 12 or a dozen full-size night crawlers, but they're about maybe 2/3 the size. And I oftentimes prefer these, especially for panfish and trout anyway. So you can get a lot more bang for your buck by buying a little bit smaller crawlers if you can get them. Tip number 3, for keeping night crawlers cold. This is how I do it. I've got a clam cooler bag here. I use this for ice fishing, but I also use it in my boat. It fits 2 or 3, depending on the size of the crawler tubs you've got, perfectly on one side, and then I use a frozen Gatorade bottle in the other side. And I can stack these things up in here, zip the top closed. It's super compact. It's got the clam lock system on the back, so I can actually hang it on a clam lock locker. It's just a super versatile bag, and I can take one out if I want, zip it back up, and keep them nice and cool. That Gatorade bottle will stay frozen all day and keep your bait nice and cool in this thing. And again, I'll leave a link below for that bag, because it's really the best way I've found to keep night crawlers and not have a giant cooler to lug around. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 is just always keep your night crawlers cool. No matter where you're going, keep them in the shade, keep them in a cooler, keep them in a fridge at home. You really need to keep them cool. If you keep them cool and moist, you don't want them like, wet, but just enough moisture in there that you're pretty much mimicking natural soil conditions. You can keep night crawlers a very, very long time. But if you leave them out in the sun, even while you're fishing for, an hour, they're gonna get too warm, they're gonna die, and any angler who's used night crawlers before knows that smell. It is not a good scenario. They turn to a mushy goo within not very much time, and that smell will stick with you. So make sure you keep those night crawlers nice and cool. And tip number 5 is pick your own night crawlers. You can pick night crawlers any night of the summer if you have wet conditions. So if you have a rain that day, or if you've got a sprinkler, you can even wet your own lawn pre-dark, and then after dark you go out and you just take a flashlight and you can see their little heads poking out of their holes. Sometimes they'll come all the way out. You can just start grabbing them, and that's the cheapest way, obviously, to get your bait, is to pick it yourself. If you have heavy soil, pretty much anywhere in the country, you'll be able to find night crawlers out there at night. So there you go, guys. 5 tips to help you save money on bait and keep it alive a little bit longer. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. I'll leave you another video to watch right here. Get hooked up.